Okay, everyone, I think we'll get started. Um, I know we have more folks that are registered. Hopefully they'll trickle in as we go. Um, Tonight's session is being recorded, so for anyone that's late or is missing the event, it's being recorded. Um, just so everyone knows. So welcome. Thank you to tonight's session for Climate Ready New Rochelle. This is our second virtual session that we're having on this subject. I'm Kevin Kane. I'm the Director of Planning and Sustainability for the City of New Rochelle. I'm joined by Councilmember Sarah Kay. I'm joined by Deputy Commissioner Carol Samwell from the Department of Development and Nick Soufis, our Sustainability Coordinator in the Department of Development. So if anyone is having any tech difficulties, or if you have any questions or comments as we go through tonight's session, you can put them in the chat. You can put them to the Zoom tech support in the chat to facilitate that. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to share information about this project and to identify some of the risks that we've noted as we've gone through this process, risks to our city. So we're going to discuss some potential resilience hubs in the city, and we can discuss what that is and where those are. We're going to definitely have opportunity for Q&A as we go through. And just remember, if you do have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat as we go through. And the staff here will compile those, and we'll get to them when we get to the Q&A session. And obviously, during that time, you'll also be able to put questions in. And we're going to have a couple polls to help facilitate the conversation as well. We've got about 90 minutes scheduled for tonight's workshop. And I just want to again remind you that this session is being recorded. Before we go any further, I just wanted to give Councilmember Sarah Kay a couple minutes for some welcoming comments. Sarah?
Thanks, Kevin. Intense wildfires that turned our sky orange, torrential rains that flooded our streets and homes, suffocating heat waves that seem to never end. There is no ignoring this. Extreme weather events are disrupting and destroying lives, and this is all related to climate change. Disaster after disaster, driven by warmer weather, making these events more likely and more extreme. And right now, our communities are unprepared. But we can lessen the damage by building our homes and our cities and infrastructure in resilient ways, by having emergency plans that keep climate-driven weather in mind, and by preparing and protecting those who are most vulnerable to this weather, and by thinking about floods and wildfires and heat waves, because how we prepare for and react to these events can determine who lives and who dies. This is why I put forth a climate emergency declaration, which was unanimously adopted by the City Council, making New Rochelle the first city in Westchester to declare a climate emergency. It's why we launched the Climate Ready initiative, and why tonight we're going to be talking about resilience hubs. Resilience hubs sprung out of the recognition that conventional emergency plans were lacking, with last-minute activation, opening one mass shelter in a government facility, and communications through mainstream channels. It just won't cut it to support our most vulnerable residents. So what is a resilience hub? It's a community space that is augmented to support residents and coordinate the distribution of resources before, during, and after an emergency. What a resilience hub does is that it leverages established, trusted, community-run facilities that are used year-round as neighborhood centers. We're going to hear so much more tonight about resilience hubs, local climate hazards, and the impact of climate change in our community. A friend who I think means well, but often offers unsolicited advice, once told me that I'm just too focused on this green stuff, that the environment, that there's a lot of other issues out there. And I could not disagree more. Climate change touches on virtually every aspect of our lives, whether it's concern for our children's health, or finding a job in a changing economy, or keeping up with the cost of living as utility bills keep rising, or protecting our homes and our families. And to appropriately confront this challenge, government cannot treat climate action as a discrete side issue. It should be embedded in everything that we do. So it's fitting that we're meeting tonight during Climate Week. On Monday, I was so fortunate to attend an event That included Samantha Power, one of the women I most admire in government. She's the USAID administrator and former US ambassador to the UN. And this was one of the things that she talked about: the need to embed attention to resilience and climate change in everything that we do, because climate change is a game changer. And when something happens and a government cannot keep up, it deepens cynicism. And it is fundamentally destabilizing when a government cannot keep up with climate change, because it compounds the loss of trust in our institutions. And we cannot allow that to happen. So I thank you all for being here and making the time and sharing your input on this essential work.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Councilmember Kay. Okay, so we're going to get into the presentation. So the goal of Climate Ready NR, this project, is to identify the city's vulnerability to negative impacts of climate change, with a particular focus on the most vulnerable communities. So to do this, there are several components planned to complete this assessment. As you can see, the list here, we've got the community engagement plan, climate change, hazard scoping, health impact assessment, natural resource inventory, the resilience hub assessment, which you've heard a little bit about already, and then community resource resiliency matrix. You can go to the next slide. And as you see, there's almost 200 surveys completed. Yeah, so our trajectory here, you can see, our partners. I apologize, actually, I should have introduced our partners that I have on the call. So Stantec is our lead consultant on this project. So we have a number of members from Stantec here. And they're working with public works partners who are helping us with the engagement process. I apologize for not mentioning them in the introduction. So anyway, these folks have been working hard, doing a ton of work, gathering background data, putting all these reports together, and then obviously going out and meeting folks at public events and other areas around the city. As you can see a photo here of one event recently. So we've had great success. It's been great getting out into the community and meeting with folks and getting feedback. We're still looking for more feedback, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But you can see as in the process here, we're at the second webinar. And after tonight's event, we're going to be incorporating the feedback from folks and getting to a final report, hopefully in October. Anyway, so moving on, we're going to have a couple poll questions tonight. Here you see the agenda. We already did the welcome. We're going to go through a couple different items, talk about resilience hubs, have the Q&A, and then wrap up with some closing remarks. So I believe next we're going to get into some of the poll questions. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So let's just kind of run a couple polls to get to know everybody in the room, see where we're coming from. So you should see a pop-up on your screen. Feel free to go ahead and answer when you can. There's a series of questions you should be able to scroll through, just so you know. We'll give everybody a minute to go through, and then we can see where we are with these results. I think we have 5 questions there for you. All right, so we'll give just a couple more seconds. I still see folks are still working on responses. They're not too hard, not too tricky. I hope. Okay. I think we should be good. Jordan, am I stopping sharing, or are you doing that?
These are the results. I don't know if you want
Oh,
to
okay. Okay.
look.
So I can just go through. Okay. I'm not having a good week with technology and presentations. Okay, so it looks like most of the folks that we have here are homeowners. We have some renters and a visitor. Uh, that's nice. Um, okay. Number two, did you attend the first virtual session? The majority did not. So that's it's good and bad. We're happy that we have some returning folks, and happy that we have some folks that are joining for the first time. I think, there was a lot of information at that first session, and you'll probably hear like a little bit of overlap tonight. But thank you all for joining us. Appreciate that. How did you hear about the event? Let's see, primarily through email blast, a couple through family members, not as much through social media, which is interesting, since everybody always talks about how important social media is. But I guess some people are a little old school with email, if I can call email old school. If we had fax, that would really be something. Okay, what brought you here today? I actually can't see the results now. Do I have to hit stop sharing? I'm nervous to do that.
No, that's all right. I can share a couple of the responses there.
Great, thank you.
Sure, no problem. So some folks said health effects of climate change. Another person said they're curious. Concern about the vulnerability of my neighborhood and community, to be informed of the involvement of the city of New Rochelle. And another person is a climate activist. And then someone else said, my concern about flooding and what New Rochelle is going to do.
Okay, great. It's a good list of responses. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for taking the poll. I think it's actually very informative and helpful. Help us understand who's here tonight. So the last question was about the survey, and just over the slight majority there has not completed the survey. So we will share information about that later. We still have a little bit of time to get survey results in before our consultants finish up the report. So there's still time to do it. So we still strongly encourage you to do it, and we'll share information on the link later on for how you can do that and help us. Okay, so close this out. And I am now going to hand the baton over to Nels Nelson from Stantec, who is going to take over and get into the meat and potatoes of our presentation tonight. So, Nels.
Hi there. My name is Nels Nelson. I'm a senior planner at Stantec, and I'm joined by a bunch of team members that you'll get to meet throughout this presentation. So we're going to go for about 50 minutes and walk you through some of the climate risks and how they're impacting New Rochelle, and also get your feedback. And at the introduction from the council member was excellent. So for that reason, we've saved the Resilient Hub discussion for last. So after we walk through some of the risks, our colleague Astrid will get on and tell you a little bit about Resilient Hubs. So we're really happy to be here. We hope that you had a really nice fall equinox. And I think that it's good that we have a little bit of material in here about the climate risks, since not everyone joined us last time. But after the exhaustive analysis that we did, the report will be made public if it's not already. It goes into a lot of detail about each of these, but we picked these top 4 to evaluate New Rochelle's assets or resources upon. So the first being extreme heat, and these are all climate related, obviously. Extreme heat, inland flooding due to increased rainfall, sea level rise, and then we had an other category, air quality, water quality, wind, things like that. And so just to give a really high level overview of what we're talking about when we talk about each of these 5 categories. In the event of climate change, there will be more extremely hot days in New Rochelle. And what you're seeing on the right is a map of surface temperatures during a previous extremely hot day, which is showing that in the city, there are areas that can get very hot due to the urban heat island effect. So if there's not street trees, if it's all impervious or concrete and asphalt, those areas get a lot hotter than areas that are wooded. And so that's something to keep in mind. The other big, it keeps on skipping 2 slides. You're gonna have to figure that out. So the next overarching risk category is precipitation. And what you see here on this chart is showing that in every season, there's a prediction of more rainfall. Those rainfall events are going to be more intense, dumping more rain. And also on the side here, we've shown a kind of a wetness map that's showing where water gets caught in New Rochelle and does things like flood basements. We've also looked at where there were pump out calls previously during the storm Ida. So that's the second big risk is flooding, like was mentioned already by the folks on this call. And then I'm very sorry, I don't know why this is jumping around so much. The third one is sea level rise. So sea levels are rising, and this map is indicating where the sea level rise is going to impact New Rochelle. So obviously it's in the low-lying areas and coastal properties, and we will show more detail on that as we get into it. So what we're doing tonight, the first thing we did was we looked at what are the hazard risks, what are the community's assets. So what do you have in terms of community resources? What's your infrastructure? What are your societal assets? What are your natural assets? Now we're looking at how does these risks from climate change intersect with your assets. And so when we're evaluating risk, we evaluate it. And so what is a low risk? It means that this new weather pattern won't have any serious impacts. It can be repaired through normal maintenance. And then I'll skip ahead to moderate. We're talking about risks that will cause some damage to infrastructure. There's going to be extra costs, some loss of service, and all the way up to very high, which is complete loss of the asset, not possible to repair it, a state of emergency. So we think about risk in that way. And this expands upon that because now we have not only the risk, but also the probability of that happening, and that 1 to 5 scale of the impact. So again, very low impact to very high impact, and then whether it's likely, whether that exposure is likely to cause that impact on the asset. So this is a little bit complicated, but bigger numbers, more risk, lower numbers, less risk. And what we did was we took all of the assets in the community, evaluated them so that we could pick a top 5. And now what we're doing today is we're bringing you what we think are the top 5 risks in terms of those 4 categories. And so we're going to talk to you about the societal risks, the infrastructural risks, and the environmental risks, and then get your feedback on how you evaluate the priority of those. So just to keep on going a little bit more, here's another overview of those climate risks. So here are all the assets like I described. Now they're on a map. Some of them are citywide. So things like vulnerable populations, persons with chronic conditions, your drainage system, those are citywide. And so they're off to the left here. And then on the map, we've actually indicated where those assets are and which of the risks they have, so that they're at risk from extreme heat, from flooding, from sea level rise. And then the magnitude of that risk is how big the little pinwheel dot is. So if we zoom in to the environmental justice communities, which are outlined in red and are mostly around Route 1 and the coast, we can see in the southern part of the city, where some of those assets are and how big those risks are. And then we're gonna go into more detail about the top ones with you and get your feedback. So if I look at this, obviously we have the environmental justice communities centered there. Along the coast, there are things like your coastal wetlands, Five Islands Park. Bernadette will talk to you about the wastewater treatment plant, other significant habitats that Gary will talk to you about. This is the lay of the land in terms of how we think about those risks that the council member brought up. So with that, I'm going to kick us off talking about the societal risks and then hand it off to my colleagues. So these are the top 5. There's going to be quite a bit of overlap in terms of what the actual risk profile is. And a lot of these are citywide. So things like the uninsured households, persons who work outdoors, persons with limited transportation, that's all citywide. The only one that we have on the map is those environmental justice blocks that I previously brought up. And so each one of these has a slightly different set of risks and potential resiliency actions. And I'm going to bring this up now, but at the end of the presentation, like I mentioned, Astrid is going to talk about how these vulnerable populations are also intersecting with the idea of resilient hubs that we're really excited about. So I'm going to talk about 5 different classes of vulnerable populations, and then we can have a discussion about the impacts. So the first one is the environmental justice communities. And so as you saw, those areas are really impacted by the urban heat island effect. That Route 1 corridor has a lot of impervious surfaces, is hotter than the other parts of the city. And so a changing climate will lead to more heat stroke and exhaustion. It'll also cause more vector-borne diseases. So that's like ticks, I believe. Food insecurity, potentially. Of course, there's also, if there's going to be flooding, that can lead to mold, difficulties with transportation access, property loss. The same thing goes for coastal flooding. So that's going to impact private property. And finally, on the other category, we have things like water and air quality issues, like the fires that we saw. Also adequate access to healthcare. And so what are some of the resiliency actions that we can think about if we think about the environmental justice communities in New Rochelle? Access to cooling centers and social services, having the city think about an extreme heat mitigation plan, again, because it's centered right there. And then we're going to talk more about how we do outreach and emergency shelters and other supportive infrastructure in the resilient hubs. So the second one is more general. It's not just people in those neighborhoods, but all vulnerable populations in the city of New Rochelle. And the 2 populations that are really impacted by climate change are the youth and elderly, and mostly because they cannot adjust in the same way that other adults can. And so they're more susceptible to things like heat stroke, heat exhaustion, and other changes to the environment. And so, but you'll see that we have a lot of the same resiliency actions to address these: cooling centers, social services, communications. The third one is persons with chronic conditions and pre-existing physical and mental health challenges or disabilities. So here, again, very similar in terms of the risk profile, but a slightly different category of people to be concerned about. Here, we might also have a discussion about how these people access health services. And then we also have households with pre-existing structural damage. So that's housing that's been damaged, or low quality housing. This is really important, especially, again, about heat. When we have extreme heat events, people who are living in well-insulated homes that might have air conditioning, they're not as at risk as the vulnerable populations who have damaged homes or homes that are not up to code. So that's definitely a population that should be considered. And they have slightly different resiliency actions in terms of building retrofits and weatherproofing. Another thing to mention here, again, is mold, other flooding issues. And finally, the fifth category is the unhoused population. So these people don't have a place to go necessarily during extreme heat events. And so some of the resiliency actions here are, again, expanding tree canopy, establishing emergency shelters, evacuation routes, and providing access to cooling and heating centers. So in some of the other discussions, you'll see that there's more variety in terms of how we talk about the assets and the approaches. But here, these are the top 5 kind of groups of people that the city of New Rochelle should prioritize. And so what we'd like to ask you to do is to respond to a poll that does kind of the same exercise that we were doing in terms of thinking about what is the most important, or who is going to, or which of these groups might have the most risk. So that's, again, thinking about the likelihood of an event impacting them, and then the extent of that event, whether it's going to be a very low risk or extremely high risk. And again, this one's a bit weird because we're talking about people, not assets, but just we'd love your input in terms of thinking about these very important issues in New Rochelle. So you should have the poll up in front of you. The first question is just ranking these from 1 to 5 in terms of priority. And then if you want to tell us anything more about why you rank them as a discussion starter, you can do that in the second question. And we'll give folks a minute to fill this out. Maybe 2, because there there are a couple questions. So again, the top societal features are the environmental justice communities, the vulnerable population, including youth and elderly, the persons with chronic conditions and pre-existing challenges, health challenges, households with pre-existing structural damage, and finally the unhoused. It looks like we are getting a couple responses in, so thank you for doing that. Okay, just a couple more seconds to wrap this up. Maybe as the last responses trickle in, I can just say looking at the early results, I don't know if everyone can see the results after you've submitted them, but it looks like the one that is being scored as a top priority by the most people is the third one. So persons with chronic conditions as being very high, also the vulnerable populations being very high. And I can see why those groups are definitely going to be vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, as we discussed, and could be supported with actions like the resiliency hub that we're going to talk about later. So are there any, for the Zoom administrator, are there any
Yes.
questions that have come up?
Yes, people did respond to the second question. A couple of folks noticed that there's overlap with some of these categories, which is quite an astute observation, I would say. And another person had said that they are currently unhoused and am concerned for their safety in these concerning conditions.
Yes, there is definitely overlap. As I mentioned in the next couple of categories that we talk about, there'll be a little bit less overlap, but you can see how these risks are citywide and are impacting a lot of different folks, but in similar ways. Okay, so thank you for filling that in. It is helpful, and basically what the point of this exercise is going to help us fine-tune how we prioritize this and then deliver that information to the city, and that they can then think about which action items they want to make sure they address first, or using information in the way that makes the most sense for New Rochelle. So this input is really helpful, because this is the experience that you're living in New Rochelle. We're on the outside, and so we really appreciate your feedback. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Bernadette to talk about infrastructure risks.
Thanks, Nels. Can you hear me okay? Nels, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I had some headphone issues earlier. Okay. So similar to what Nels did outlining the societal components, I'm going to go through the infrastructure portions. So this section talks about climate risks to infrastructure. So thinking about roads, buildings, homes, utilities. As you can see, we outline the top 5 risks in the matrix on your screen, and we'll go through the same process. With the next couple slides, I kind of want to highlight some of the issues, and then we'll dive into each one a little bit further. So the housing infrastructure, looking at the variety of home ownership within the city. The drainage system, so that's really looking at the network of both natural and constructed pipe systems to collect water when it rains and convey that away from buildings. So we want water not to accumulate, not by our houses, kind of push it away. New Rochelle's transit center, which is a transportation hub in New Rochelle, we really see that as a key evacuation route and also a key hub of New Rochelle, so significant importance there. New Rochelle's wastewater treatment plant. So that plays a role in treating and purifying the wastewater that's generated from our homes and businesses before it's released back into the water. And then finally, New Rochelle's drinking water system. So a large majority of New Rochelle's drinking water is actually supplied from surface waters, such as reservoirs and lakes. So you can start to think about how these climate change impacts could have an impact on that. So I want to direct your focus to the right side of the map here. There is a lot going on, but I just want to highlight a few things. So this map talks about the risks of inland flooding. So that's really looking at that interior drainage system, as well as the risk of sea level rise. So as you can see, and Nels noted this earlier, the areas in the blue along the Long Island Sound there are at a higher risk of sea level rise. And then interior, there have been some information we got from the Hurricane Ida calls, about 200 residents registered flooding in their homes. And that's really a result of these extreme weather events that we're seeing, where a large amount of water comes in a very short period of time, overwhelming that drainage network. This information, I guess, was just so you know, obtained from sea level rise projections. So looking at both the 2050 and 2100, a high level look at the drainage system. So running a topographic wetness indicator, which is really a way of looking at how fast does water fly off the surface, where does it tend to sit, and where could we expect a higher chance of flooding. And also feedback from our public outreach efforts. As you can see, the risk is high along New Rochelle's coast. The elevated water levels here from sea level rise could result in coastal flooding, in that low-lying area along the coast. And then as we see these extreme weather events, you can expect storm surges, which could result in property damage, erosion of the coastline, and negative impacts to our ecosystem. This sea level rise could also impact the drainage network, its ability to discharge to the water system. So the drainage is collected by overland flow in channels and underground pipe systems, and then discharged down at the bottom there to the Long Island Sound. So as the water levels rise, that pipe network becomes filled during wet weather events. So that could result in water backing up into our low-lying areas again. So changes in precipitation that Nels mentioned. So we're seeing these higher intensity storm events, so flashier storm events where a lot of water falls in a really short period of time, but we're also experiencing periods of drought. So really understanding how that could impact our drinking water systems is important to consider as well. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. This map is really highlighting the risk of extreme heat. So if you can take a look, the colors in darker purple or darker black there really represent the areas that Nels pointed out that have a higher impervious cover. So that means that when it rains, water is not able to seep through the ground. Impervious means buildings, roads, things that tend to have a hotter surface temperature that aren't able to cool. So climate change projections show that the frequency and intensity and duration of these heat waves will increase over time. So we're expecting them more, we're expecting them to be hotter and to extend for longer periods of time. This obviously has impacts to our public health, to our ecosystems, our energy grid demands, and recreation. There's also an increased demand of water supply during heat waves. So that impacts our reservoirs and surface waters. And they're also impacted by the heat because water evaporates faster from these surface waters, and then being able to keep up with the demand. So you can see that the mapping of the land surface temperature shows that the most extreme effects are happening in areas with the high impervious coverage and also in those environmental justice zones downtown there. They tend to have a lack of vegetation and tree canopy cover and a higher surface temperature. Okay, so that's our overview, and I wanted to just briefly talk through each one in a little bit more detail. So the housing infrastructure, as Nels mentioned, applies to all types of housing systems. There's obviously the impact from heat island effects. But as you can see, there have been increased flooding concerns, building damage from these extreme weather events, and potential equipment failure. Resiliency actions could be to implement waterproofing measures along the exterior of the homes, retrofitting the homes for improved energy efficiency and cooling, so really addressing that extreme heat concern, the establishment of emergency shelters and evacuation routes, and then looking at the downtown areas, ways to impact that heat island effect that's happening. We could look at density restrictions, so reducing how much land could be developed on, or the types of development that would be more appropriate that focus on green infrastructure and trees. Looking at ways to reduce development in these flood-prone areas that we've identified. And then finally, implementing coastal protection measures and erosion control measures along the coastline to prevent that water surging from impacting our low-lying areas. Looking at the drainage system, again, this is both overland conveyance and then the pipe drainage network. So the concerns really are that as we see these flashy storm events, these pipes become overwhelmed. And it's really the intensity of the storm that's driving the pipes to back up into our street networks. So looking at ways to provide extra capacity over land through grading, increasing storage capacity in our drainage system, raising overflow elevation, so that would be down where the water discharges to a water body, making sure that that elevation is high enough so that it's not impacted by sea level rise. Looking at operation and maintenance procedures That's in particular for some of those open channels where maybe a tree has fallen and kind of impedes the flow of water. Establishing green infrastructure principles and encouraging the use of infiltration-based practices. So that's really getting the water back into the ground, taking it out of the stormwater system, looking at systems that promote the use of vegetation to really cool down the environment and to absorb more water. And then to identify and eliminate illegal stormwater connections. So sometimes there are pipes that are connected illegally to the wastewater treatment plant, and that causes some issues with the ability to treat the wastewater. So identifying and eliminating those sources would be really helpful. The New Rochelle's Transit Center has been identified high on our list because of its hub and its evacuation abilities. Things that we've identified here really are hardening the structures to withstand these extreme weather events, retrofitting the buildings, increasing vegetation cover, and reducing impervious surfaces around the perimeter. The wastewater treatment plant, I highlighted a few of those already, but really the key is to manage the water that's getting into the system and make sure that it's only wastewater getting to the treatment plant. Due to its location along the water, coastal protection measures are needed to ensure that as the water rises, it's not getting into these systems and impacting its ability to treat the water. And again, eliminating those illegal connections into the sanitary system. Okay, and then finally, the drinking water system. So as I mentioned, the reservoirs are the main source of water. So we really need to consider how do we manage our water in drought conditions? How do we ensure that we maintain the water levels? Look at ways to address the warming water temperatures. So resiliency actions include upgrading the utilities to withstand damage from these extreme weather events. Consider saltwater intrusion where appropriate. So that's the idea of sea level rise coming in and creating salt of our local waterways. Looking at diversifying our water sources so that we're building some resiliency into the drinking water and increasing the storage of reservoirs. So as we see more and more intense quick storm events, we've got to create a big bowl to collect that water so that we can get through the droughts. So similar to what we did before, we're going to launch a poll now, and I'll pass it back to you, Nels.
Yep. So yeah, similar exercise. The Zoom admin can pull the poll up. Thinking about these 5 features that Bernadette did a really good job explaining in terms of how you think about the level of importance or the level of impact in the community. And we're doing okay on time, but I'd like to just have this poll up for a couple minutes and then move on to Gary, and then finally the resilient hubs with Astrid. So I see a couple of results coming in. We're talking about the housing system, we're talking about the drainage, transit center, wastewater treatment plant, and the drinking water supply. And if you have any additional thoughts, feel free to drop that into the second question. So we have 7 responses so far. It looks like the couple highest leading in terms of their importance to the city is the drainage system and the drinking water supply. So that feedback is again really helpful to help us fine-tune how we think about the impacts and what the top priorities are. So this is really useful and helpful input. Whoops. Okay, so that's a couple of minutes. I think you can still respond, but I'm not sure if you can see the results, but what we again have is those two leaders in the drainage system and the drinking water supply being really high performers. Should we talk about any of the short answers?
Yes, a couple of those came in. One says water is an irreplaceable resource. We are putting up lots of housing, so a little bit worried about more so the water supply than housing. Another comment, flash floods have really affected many homes at a high personal cost to homeowners. And then they give some personal details, but that is a concern as well.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much for that. And now we're going to hand it off for 10 minutes to Gary to talk about the environmental features.
Thank you, Nils. Thank you, everyone. So it's quite extraordinary as we consider vulnerability, how much our natural environment is either impacted by or equates to remedies to our most pressing concerns related to climate change. So we're going to highlight a few, 5 items here, and then get into a bit more detail in just in a moment. So there are 5 features that we're speaking to here. In New Rochelle's coastline and the Long Island Sound, and as someone had pointed out earlier, there's quite a bit of overlap between these subjects, especially with New Rochelle being a coastal community. We'll speak about parks, significant habitats for endangered native species, including threatened species as well, wetlands and how vitally important they are in our urban communities. The more we densify, the more we rely on these wetlands, and the more we rely on our parks to provide vital functions as infrastructure within our cities. And then impervious land cover, whether it's commercial, industrial, or even residential lot coverage, and how they're contributing to our risks. So the illustration to the right, I know it's quite detailed and it's small scale here, but what really stands out are the concentration of risks, just looking at the dots that appear along the coastline. And that's where we have a great part of the city's population, where many people go to recreate. It's a center of commerce. And again, it's vitally important to the city's economic viability and to health and wellness of the city's population. So as we progress through the remaining slides, I'll highlight a few items and refrain from reading through all of the text. So next, we have, the coastline, Long Island Sound. So under heat, the moisture loss in wetlands and coastal wetlands is important. Now, these coastal wetlands are some of the most ecologically diverse landscapes that we have, and they feed our food chain, and they support the economic viability of Long Island Sound, and certainly businesses that are within the city of New Rochelle. And overlap with some of the other subjects is the overtaxing of the water treatment plant due to increased rainfall and stormwater infiltration that leads to untreated waste outflow. So Bernadette had talked about illegal connections, but the systems also throughout the city are quite old. And in some places, these systems might be compromised. And that's allowing stormwater infiltration into those systems. And where to find those locations can be quite difficult, but that stormwater could be offsetting the capacity of the treatment plants to treat water completely, or your wastewater completely. And those are just older systems that might exist in a public network or even a private sector. Looking at sea level rise, the increased risk of sea level rise and what that is doing to our shoreline between erosion and loss of property, potentially the loss of life, and the cost of the destruction that we're seeing along our shorelines, not for residences and for businesses alike, and also the loss of habitat. So as we look at resiliency actions, I'll just highlight a couple. Implementing shoreline protection measures such as living shorelines and restoring salt marshes and coastal wetland habitats, really a trend across the entire region. And then identifying and eliminating these illegal stormwater connections to the wastewater treatment plant, but also identifying where the systems may be compromised and make timely repairs so that we're not taking on as much stormwater through those systems. Next. Parks. Well, again, it's really interesting how as cities densify, how much more we rely on our parks. They are our critical infrastructure, and they're providing for recreation, social interaction, the health and well-being of people, for stormwater management, and urban cooling, as we've experienced just in the month of September this year, excessive days approaching 90 degrees plus. As we look at heat, the loss of diversity and the loss of native species, parks are providing that diversity. If you think of even long-eared bats and what they do for devouring nuisance insects, and even losing beneficial species and insects, that the loss of monarch butterflies and habitat that we're seeing, that we're encroaching upon and greatly impacting, and that climate is greatly impacting. As we consider wetlands, accessibility during storms, lost days, where the public their only means for respite is to get to a public park, and if those sites are flooded, they lose that opportunity. And then parks are providing capacity for stormwater retention, but the more we encroach and the more we densify, the less capacity the parks have to serve that function. New Rochelle has premier parks along its waterfront, and if we're more subject to flooding, we can lose extensive days of loss for that recreation resource, and potentially loss of property and injury to people. On the resiliency actions in the lower left side, erosion control measures are vitally important in our parks, and enhancing park resiliency. And what do we mean by that? Well, if the sites are going to flood, prepare for that flooding, and then allow for those sites to respond quickly, and allow for public visitation soon after the water recedes. And that's really the definition of resiliency in our park space. As we move on to significant habitats for endangered species, the loss of species diversity and again, beneficial insects and wildlife is certainly a result of climate change. If we're under the subject of heat, invasive species, including monoculture and loss of biodiversity, both flora and fauna, is evident through climate change. We're seeing increased flooding and how that is impacting biodiversity. Species that have existed within our parks and in our urban forests are in severe decline due to insect infestations, and also due to weather. As the weather is changing, these trees are less, and this vegetation is less able to rebound and respond and adjust to those conditions. Under actions, land conservation, protection, and restoration measures could be considered, and implementing shoreline protection measures so that we don't see the erosion along the shorelines and the habitats that exist along these shorelines, and due to the impacts of sea level rise and climate change. Moving on to wetlands, we've emphasized wetlands in some of the previous topics, and in our urban environments, they are essential to stormwater management. There are communities through the northern part of town and in the areas along North Avenue that these pockets of vegetation and wetlands are providing a significant stormwater function. Previous work in Flowers Park, which was an intervention, is actually mitigating stormwater by building in that infrastructure into a new park design. So these wetlands, as we encroach and as we see intensity of rain and the frequency of rain, we're really putting quite a burden on these wetlands in our urban environments. But you can also see the impacts of drought, excessive periods of drought. It lifts groundwater again, or reduces groundwater levels. You have less runoff going into these wetlands, and the species that then rely on water are then deprived of water for a period of time. Many species throughout the region are suffering from drought in previous years. It takes them years to recover, and sometimes it takes years to recognize the impacts of drought and even excessive rain. Under inland flooding, the overall degradation of wetlands that we might be seeing in our parks, because of the species diversity loss, because of heat, because of flooding, or because of drought. And the decrease in the ability to manage stormwater by providing retention if you have excessive rain or too much rain, or if you have a degraded wetland, that stormwater function could be impacted. Then you can have an impact on communities, loss of property, loss of commerce, and other impacts to our daily lives, very disruptive. Under resiliency actions, maintaining buffers around wetlands and protecting those buffers and not allowing encroachment and even expanding them if it's possible. And in urban environments, wetlands need to be managed. These systems are very tight and we expect a great deal from them. And with climate change, those expectations are elevating, but then the need to manage is elevated as well. As we move into the final topic, topic 5, impervious land cover, especially in our commercial and industrial uses. You're seeing increased heat island effect due to this coverage because you're losing essentially vegetation. Vegetation provides that cooling and the valuable transpiration that you have between air and moisture in the ground. But when you're exposed ground plane to pavements, you get that excessive heat. And that excessive heat could have many impacts on public health, but also on how the air functions and air movements and the cooling of our city. So in inland wetlands, in terms of inland wetlands, you're seeing water quality degradation because you're getting excessive runoff from these impervious surfaces that are carrying sediments and carrying nutrients, and they're coming in as superheated water. So rather than cooling and infiltrating through the ground, they're hitting these environments at higher temperatures, and they're quickly flowing into Long Island Sound, which is then exacerbating water temperatures within the sound. And warmer waters are not healthy for much of our habitats of plant life and wildlife. So the increase in impervious cover certainly has a negative impact. And with the acceleration of climate change, you're going to see that somewhat nearly the double whammy of the two. So the infrastructure damage and inundation due to increased flood depth and greater storm surge is all a result of, or could be a result of, this increased impervious land cover. As we look at resiliency actions, reducing impervious surfaces and encourage replacement with permeable surfaces such as vegetation, anything other than bituminous and or concrete, and using lighter colors where possible, all go a long way in providing additional resiliency measures in response to climate change. So I'll refrain from reading through the rest. I think the stories and the weaving between all of these topics, it's truly a lot of overlap. These are systems that we're talking about, and they are all interrelated. So with that, we'll move on to the polling questions, and I'll turn it back to Nels. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That was really enlightening. So yeah, feel free to pull the polling questions up on Zoom. We're going to go again just a couple of minutes here and then get into the resilient hubs. And so, yeah, that was fascinating. I did not myself think about how the water coming off of the urban heat island effect impervious surfaces would degrade the other systems it interacts with. That's really fascinating. So thanks for sharing that, Gary. Again, we have 2 questions. We're asking for your input on the Long Island Sound, parks, significant habitats, wetlands, and the impervious cover. And then if you have any notes about that you'd like us to see, you can type those in. And we'll give folks about another minute and then hand it over to Astrid. So in terms of how folks are prioritizing these, it seems like the number one is wetlands. So that's really interesting. That's a very high priority. They obviously have a lot of ecosystem services they provide, as Gary explained. And then it looks like folks are also very interested in addressing the impervious land cover issues. Are there any issues coming up that we should, or any short answers that we should talk about?
Let me pull them up. All right. People are noticing again some overlap between significant habitats in Long Island coastline, um, stating that the coastline should be significant habitat, and if it is not, it needs to be restored. Again, noting that these are interrelated and all important, and the stability of industries are priority for sustainability of life and all species.
Great. Okay, well, thank you everyone for filling that in. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Astrid.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Astrid Mayak, and I'm an urban designer and planner. I'll talk about resilience hubs for New Rochelle. And for those of you who were not part of our previous webinar, just to refresh a little bit on what are resilience hubs, I'll give you a little bit of the brief answer. Resilience hubs are community-based centers that aim to strengthen our city's ability to bounce back from challenges and emergencies. They are multifunctional centers that provide vital resources and support during times of crises. They're designed to foster community engagement, collaboration, and resilience building activities. They serve as safe spaces. Residents can come together, share resources, and find assistance during emergencies. But we also see resilience hubs in a more holistic way. It's not only about bouncing back or only centered around the hazards, but it's actually thinking about how we are thriving amidst changing climate conditions and enhancing our residents' quality of life. Next slide. So part of that is looking at our communities and our systems in a more holistic year-round manner and thinking about how resilience as a community cohesion, community connectivity, also solutions that are actually focused and centered around people instead of just being hazard focused. So we've compiled a list of potential hub locations, as you can see on the screen. These are physical locations where people can go to and that they already rely on for different services year-round. The New Rochelle High School, it has a lot of year-round programming, and it's not only serving its immediate community, but adjacent communities of students as well. It's actually an incredibly diverse student population. Hope Community Services, YMCA, the Humane Society of Westchester, as we have seen in previous emergency climate situations, pets sometimes get left behind because senior citizens or other people are not able to take them with wherever they need to go to be safe in that moment. The Henry Barnard Elementary School, Mascara Boys and Girls Club, the Remington Boys, Girls and Club, the Hugh Doyle Senior Citizen Center, which actually has backup energy generation possibilities through the solar panels, Trinity Elementary School, the New Rochelle Public Library, which already acts as a cooling center, and this summer has functioned as that. The Huguenot Children's Library, the American Legion, a lot of veterans and other vulnerable populations go here. And lastly, the New Rochelle Forest Development Program that focuses a lot of their work on sustainability. We know resilience is not just in the event of a disruption, but it is actually intended to be there for us to do that community building. So these are physical locations in the neighborhoods, and we prioritize these locations in our most marginalized and disenfranchised communities because they are the spaces that need them the most. And they are intended to be there to coordinate this connection, this communication, to bring people together, but also to have programs, services, and other sort of elements around distributing resources. Next slide. As we can see in the map, we have classified some of these sites as primary, secondary, and supporting resilience hubs. A primary hub is more of like the centrally and strategically located facility, could serve as a primary point of coordination and resource distribution during emergencies. It could also be equipped with essential supplies, communication tools, and trained staff to provide immediate assistance to residents. A secondary hub is supplementary. and located in close proximity to the primary hubs. It could serve as an additional resource center, reinforcing primary hubs' efforts and expanding the reach of support within the community. And a supported hub would be more of a decentralized and designed to provide equitable access to resources, information, and capacity building in the longer term to enhance the community resilience at a grassroots level. All of these hubs provide localized support, community engagement activities, and serve as a resource fostering strong neighborhood networks during, before, and after shocks. Resilience hubs in the Rochelle will play a crucial role in building a resilient and connected community, and that helps strengthen the community's ability to respond, recover, and thrive in the face of a changing climate. As we can see in the map, a lot of these hubs are located within areas that are very well connected by public transportation or other big transportation hubs, which would make it easy and accessible for vulnerable populations, lower income populations, Hispanic population who might not have access to a vehicle, and senior populations who might need to be picked up, dropped off in certain times. So that's the logic behind assigning some of these candidate sites the different type of potential for a resilience hub. Of course, they are not all perfect. A lot of them are in places where they could be at risk of certain other hazards, and potentially in the future, we will recommend and we will implement more measures to make sure that these hubs are better equipped and adapted to the changing climate conditions of the future. Thank you.
There were two questions associated with the resilient hubs, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, so we can pull those up. You want to talk about how you thought of these questions, Astrid?
Yeah, well, people are responding. Two quick answers is, what are trusted locations in your neighborhood? And where would you go if you had to leave your house? These are rapid, quick questions. We just want to get an idea of where people already go, rely on, what are locations that you already engage with and trust that are local to you, just to make sure that we're gathering enough public feedback on these locations or others. And please, if you are able to send more feedback after this webinar, we would be more than happy to consider that into the selection of the sites.
Great, so we'll just give folks a minute to fill that out. And then we'll open it up for a broader Q&A. And we already have some questions that we've received in the chat. If there are others, I believe you sent it to the Zoom admin. Correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of where people should be sending questions.
Yes, that's correct. You can send it to the Zoom tech support. That's my name here. So send them to me. All right.
Okay, so just a couple more seconds on this. We're not going to have a statistics to show, but we will collect these responses, and Astrid will incorporate them into her analysis. So thank you for participating in that poll, and thank you, Astrid, for that really great explanation of resilient hubs and what their purpose is and how we're thinking about it so far. And with that, I might stop sharing my screen so we can have the grid, and then we can go into Q&A. Does that sound like the right thing to do? Yeah, okay. Sure. So let's take a look. Um, looks like one of the questions is getting some chatter. Bernadette or Kevin, do you want to talk about that issue?
Sure. So the first question was, in the resiliency plans for environmental justice communities, it didn't mention planting trees or greening to combat heat island effect. I know Yonkers got 1 million to do this. Can we work on breaking up sidewalks and concrete cement and put in more trees, as well as bioswales and green islands to help mitigate flooding? And there's a second comment here that I think relates, so maybe I'll read that as well. Another suggestion to combat flood mitigation: can the city be more creative in requiring green infrastructure on all new construction, also putting in permeable pavement parking lots whenever possible with bioswales, and even removing pavement and converting roads to green space and community gathering spots wherever possible? So I think in the environmental justice communities, we are recommending that we look at the impervious coverage and look to identify locations for trees and green infrastructure wherever possible. That will be a recommendation that's put into the report, which will be used to put forth future initiatives and plans within the city.
Great. Thank you for that, Bernadette. So I might just answer some of these questions as they're coming up. So we just had a question about, in the last meeting, we talked about analyzing the results of the flood drainage study that the DPW is conducting. And that study is still being finalized. And so we haven't seen the results of it yet. And so we high level know that drainage is an issue, but we have not seen the results of that yet.
I will add that Department of Public Works, who is responsible for that work, is keenly aware that we're interested in that. So we are, they're keeping in touch with us, and it's something that's certainly a priority that we want to, if we can, make sure that it's incorporated into the work here.
Great.
Nels, if it's okay, I'll jump in. I know there was a question about downtown overlay zone number 7, which is a question I can take. Someone had asked what the status of that was and the requirements for shoreline restoration. So that zoning was adopted in 2001 by the council, and developer Twining Properties is still pursuing developing that property with a mixed-use development there. The zoning code that was adopted requires a 30-foot wide, a minimum of a 30-foot wide waterfront promenade that has to include shoreline restoration. It has to include planting with native species and things like that. So they are formulating their plans and do intend on bringing those, forward to the city for review soon. So it has to include, per the zoning, that type of feature along the waterfront. So that is the current status of that component.
Great. And there was a question about where can one be a participant in these hubs. So Master, you can take any and all your questions about resilient hubs because it's a really exciting concept.
Yeah, as part of our recommendations, we will propose that these hubs work in close partnership with the city and other relevant agencies to support and build this community resiliency capacity. A lot of these hubs have been selected as potential candidate sites because there's already that connection with that community. They already have year-round programming. They are already building capacity. A lot of these are, for example, like after-school programs or other programs that focus on certain skills that could enhance the resilience capacity of students in the communities. So once this program gets implemented, then people are going to be able to formally participate, but there will always be opportunities to be part of the emerging movement towards resiliency. So I think in a lot of the cases, for example, I can give you just one example. We are picking a lot of different schools instead of, let's say, other types of community-oriented organizations or centers, primarily because in a lot of previous cases where there have been extreme weather events, schools probably need to be the first one to open up, as people, adults, parents, families with young children need to go back to work, and they cannot go back to work if the schools are not open for programming for the children and the students and other main necessities. So that is one of the reasons why we chose that, but also schools and other educational institutions are very, very well connected with the community through many different programs, as well as the other supporting locations. We're hoping that potentially in the future, there could be even more, creating a broader network, not just in New Rochelle, but maybe in neighboring municipalities.
Great, thank you for that. So get us any last questions that you might have, and then we'll wrap this webinar up. So we just had a question. Any plans for other types of renewable energy sources? That is not something that we looked at specifically in this climate vulnerability assessment, but if anyone from the city wants to pick it up.
I mean, I'll just say, broadly, high level, that it's a little bit outside the scope of this project. I mean, indirectly, it's kind of woven in certain areas as part of this, but like more directly, what the city is doing about renewable energy sources, I would say that, there's a number of different things that we're looking into, and I'm happy to chat with anyone about that if they want to follow up with myself or Nick Soufis directly. We can talk about some different initiatives that we have underway. Okay. Unless there's anything else, I guess we can wrap up. I think we probably want to bring the slide deck back up, if I'm correct, with information for moving forward.
Yep, working on it.
Okay, thanks, Nels.
No problem. So yeah, sorry for the messy screen. But yeah, if there were a few folks who filled out the survey at the beginning who said that they had not taken the survey yet, and so we would really love everyone who hasn't had a chance to do that to go to this URL, Climate Ready Survey, fill it out. It's only take a couple minutes, and it's really going to help us. And that'll be closing rather soon, so that we can incorporate the results into our final report. A draft of the climate vulnerability assessment should be live, or will be going live very shortly. And so we would also welcome any feedback on that. And then with the input that we've received tonight, we will continue to refine that matrix of priorities and deliver that to the city, and then get some feedback and make a release to the public, as was mentioned, in October, which is just around the corner.
Thanks, Nels. I just want to add that the survey is available in English and Spanish. So if there's anyone that that speaks Spanish or prefer to take it in Spanish, it is available in both languages. And so, yeah, if you have taken it, you can also still help by sharing it with other folks that in the community. We'd love to get as much input as we could. So we'd appreciate any assistance that you all can offer. And I guess with that, I just want to say thank you all for attending. Thank you, for those who have taken the survey. thank you for taking the polls this evening. They're very helpful and very informative, not just for this conversation here tonight, but for the report and for moving forward. So yeah, with that, thank you all. Thank you for coming tonight. This is going to conclude this evening's session. So thank you all. Have a great evening.